Hey everybody, it's Jamonster back again with Opus Gaming, and I'm here today to bring you our first Red Monkey D Luffy deck profile. I've been really excited to bring this to the channel because this has been my choice as a red aggressive leader ever since OP01 dropped, and I think that he provides just such a cool, unique playstyle that he just really can't be understated. I want to give him a little bit of praise on the channel here. So he's been picking up a lot of steam in the North American format as well. So I kind of want to get kind of some of my ideas out there and just kind of like some of the lines of play that I like to go to. So let's just jump into why I like this leader so much with his leader ability. His leader effect is activate main once per turn. You can attach a rested Dawn onto either one of your leaders or one of your character cards. So even though that doesn't seem like anything too crazy when you look at it in a vacuum, the fact is you can use this leader effect every single turn throughout the game. So he's a pretty high impact leader, and it's just incremental bits of advantage that you get from using the extra Dawn every turn that add up to being just a very powerful force that your opponent has to deal with kind of going throughout the game. So that's something we'll talk about as we kind of get deeper into the deck profile, but I'll move the leader off to the side and let's talk about our first set of one drops. Let's talk about the Nami package. We're running 4 of the one that comes in OP01 and 4 of the starter deck one. So starting off with the starter deck one, because I just think that that one is the one that's made for this deck, that it's just insane, honestly. Oops, sorry, I'll move this over here. So with the starter deck Nami, what her ability is, she's a 1 cost with 1000 power, but her activate main is the same as your leader. You can attach a rested Dawn to one of your character cards or your leader card. Where that is just like crazy effective is that it combines really well with your Luffy. So when you're playing things like Zoro, your Zoro can swing for 7k after your leader Luffy's already swung for 5k or something like that, or just being able to divide your Dawn up and just continue that rested Dawn being basically active Dawn advantage that you stack up on your opponent, that is just very, very powerful. So we're playing 4 of her and then we'll move her off to the side. Now with the Searcher Nami, I mean, honestly, there's not too much crazy to say about her. She's just a fantastic card. She has counter. She's your searcher. She's your starter. The fact that she has 2000 power, being a 1-drop that searches your top 5 for a Straw Hat type card, and it can be character or event type card, which is really nice, just gives her so much value. There's not all too much to say, but her 2000 power is kind of easier to stack onto to make a meaningful swing. Sometimes you just want to poke for 5. Sometimes you want to get your characters that are on board kind of cleared off, so your opponent has to give you some cards from life. But that's something we'll kind of get into a little bit later into the deck profile as well. And what we'll do is we'll go through the cards and we'll circle back and talk about like matchups and where I think this deck is in the meta as well at the end. So stay tuned for that. But we're going to just get into the choices here first. Talking about Helmeppo. This is kind of my personal choice. It's a promo card. It's a 1-drop that says give one of your character or leader cards plus 1k. Now, kind of a theme of what I do is utilizing cards that I've had to play in the past to conserve my rush attacks and things like that in hand. So if I had to play a Nami in my starting turn, and even if I don't have, sometimes it's just the fact that you don't have the rush attackers. Being able to turn certain cards into attacks is really, really useful. And what this card does is just give you a package of value. So when you tap one to play this card to boost one of your character cards or leader cards by 1k, you can just activate your leader card to attach a Dawn onto that same card. So now you've only tapped 1 card to make, played 1 card to give a card plus 2k. But in the situations where you have a 2k on the board, you'll usually have to attach 3 Dawn onto that 2k to make it an attacker. But if you have a Helmeppo in hand, you tap 1, boost that 2k to 3k, activate leader effect to attach that Dawn that you just tapped to that card, and then you just attach one of your active Dawn. So now it's been effectively 2 Dawn that you use to make that card into a meaningful attacker. And those small situations and those small instances of value are the reason that we play the Helmeppo. It's really, really nice, and it's something that you may not think of as much, but it comes up in gameplay quite a bit. I haven't had a situation where I really didn't like the Helmeppos yet. And it has counter power, so it's not like you're playing a rush attacker or something that's really, really big that's hard to utilize. It's very easy to utilize because when you can't play it, you can counter with it. Bartolomeo is going to be the blocker of choice. We don't play any Tony Chopper in this list just because I don't like the fact that it has no counter, and the fact that it just costs 1 doesn't matter to me as much because this is a more versatile blocker and this deck is more aggro in general anyway. So we only have about 4 slots for the blockers, and we're just using them with Bartolomeo. just because he also has that 1K counter, but because the 2 drop cost for him doesn't really come up to being a negative. The turns where you're playing a blocker, I've noticed that I just don't care whether my blocker costs 1 or 2 or whatever I have to do. It just kind of works out. So I really like the 4 Bartolomeo, and I wouldn't really change it. The fact that you can attach 2 Dawn onto him as well, and the Dawn can be some of your rested Dawn to make him a more meaningful blocker on your next turn that can't get bypassed by like things like Shanks and stuff like that is pretty important. So the first part of this deck profile we're going through is all the cards with counter, all the character cards with counter that we play. So now we're getting into our big boys, which is the vanilla Ben Beckman. I'm playing this card because, first of all, Ben Beckman is a super cool red hair Pirates character. I really like him, and then the fact that he has 9K power, 7 drop, it helps with your Eustass Kid matchup, which is something that you'll see we make some concessions in our deck and our red strategy in general that may weaken us against the Kid matchup, but we try to use things like this to make up for it. So 7 drop 9K is really easy point that you can use. So if you're on your mid game turns and you don't have a 5 drop Luffy, or maybe you're out of rush attackers, tapping 7, playing this card out, and then if you have a Nami and a Luffy ability still active, you just attach both onto leader, swing leader for 7, and that's a pretty meaningful attack that your opponent has to deal with while still using a really good character card as your point, even though it's not a rush attacker. And when I'm saying point, I mean the kind of first instance that you're tapping Dawn for the turn. That's kind of how I look at my plays in this deck. Is sometimes my point will be a rush attack where I'm tapping 3 or 2, and that's where I'm getting my tap Dawn from to then utilize my effects, and then I'm going about the rest of my turn as a regular turn. So Ben Beckman there. Now let's get into our 2K counters because we're playing a decent package. We're going to actually just talk about the Sanji by himself before we bring the Luffy out, because this card is actually pretty cool. I actually use this card as a starter as well. Some strategies, what they'll do is not swing into your life at all when they're playing against red early game. So if I go first and I see this in my hand, I will actually board, or if I'm going second, I'm sorry, and I see this in my hand, even if I am going first, in the early game, if I don't have other plays, this is a really good play for me because I can pick up a card to hand without my opponent having to swing into me. And the fact of the matter is they're still going to have to swing into my character cards before they can swing into my life. So I can pick up life down to about 4 or maybe 3 in some matchups and know that I'm comfortable in that situation because I play a lot of these counters and things like that. And then I have a larger hand size and a larger pool of cards to put aggression onto my opponent. This is a strategy I've picked up like fairly recently, and I really like playing these Sanjis like that. I think that it's a really useful way to use a character card, and it's more than just using it as the 2K counter. So just something I would implore for you guys. I think you could do something similar in Red Zoro. If you're going first and you know your opponent's not going to swing into you, but you need that extra bit of resource, you could definitely, or if you're going second, you can definitely tap 2 and just play that. It does cost you one of your 2K counters, but it is what it is when you're getting a powerful board state. The rest of our 2K counters is going to be 4 Luffy, 2 Otama. The reason we're not playing 4 Otama and 2 Luffy is that because Luffy is a searchable 2K counter. So in the situations where I'm hitting an in 2 years or something like that in my life, or even if I'm just playing the Nami and I'm looking at the top cards in my deck and I'm like, how do I protect this Sanji? How do I protect this Zoro? How do I protect this Luffy? Sometimes I just got to pick up a 2K counter, and having searchable 2K counters is really important in my opinion, and that's why you're seeing the Sanji and that's why you're seeing the Luffy in the deck profile. With the Otama, everybody knows Otama Jet Pistol is very powerful, but I just don't utilize that combo as much as some other people. I think that I have a lot of ways to kind of put pressure onto the 8 cost kid, as well as putting pressure and swinging high attack into my opponent's 7 cost kid. So those are just my opinions on the green matchup. If you feel like you struggle with it and you are using this deck profile as a template, feel free to kind of swap around your 2K counters if you really feel like you want to drop the 2K to drop those bigger guys down to 6K and a more deal withable status. So, all right, I'll put these kind of like off to the side on top of her. Now let's talk about the rush package. We're going to talk about everything all together: 4 Sanji, 4 Zoro, and 3 Luffy. Before, I guess it's technically 2 Shanks as well. So let's go into those. All right, starting off with the 4 Sanji, I suppose, because this one is the most important in my opinion. Sanji's fantastic. Sanji isn't as powerful in other red strategies, but with your leader effect, it's just really usable. So you tap 2 and play this guy out. If you have a leader and Nami, that's the most perfect situations you can have for this Sanji, because then he's a 2 cost 6K rush attacker. That's just really, really crazy. When you're looking at your later turns even, it doesn't have to be an early player. It can be dropped in the late game and make a pretty decent impact on your opponent because you can attach 1 Dawn onto him. So now you spent 3 Dawn total. He's a 7k attacker. And if you really have to force damage on your opponent, that's just the route to go. Sanji's effect and like kind of his usefulness in this deck can't be understated because he's very much so tied with Zoro in the droppable and usable rush attackers in this deck, and that's something that is very unique to the Luffy strategy. So being able to really utilize a rush attacker and not kind of have to just rely on the Zoro is really cool because Sanji's actually a fantastic card, and that's something that I've only seen in the Luffy deck. So next up is Zoro. This one I can talk a lot less about because Zoro leaders use this card so effectively, and it's I don't know, it's a really good card. There's not a lot you can say about it. 3 costs, it's really usable. It's not as free as the Sanji is, but you can tap 3, play him out, and then if you do have that leader and that Nami on board, then you can push for 7 for free. It still costs you 3, just like Sanji did, but you don't have to like attach when you're then active Dawn. So really usable card as well. Not a lot to say about it though. Next up, we have the Luffy. Oh, I keep on doing this backwards. Sorry, guys. I just want these to be like screenshotable for anybody that really wants it. 3 Luffy. This card is your perfect finisher, and the thing is, I've seen people kind of drop him down to lower numbers, and I wouldn't agree with that just because Luffy is a card that you can drop on curve on 5 to just be a 6k swing rush attacker. He's pretty expensive, but he's just on curve. If you've dropped a rush attacker every turn and your opponent swung into it every turn and they haven't really gone into your life, and you pick up the Luffy and you know that you can kind of find another one, or you have searches for another one, or you're holding another one, I'd definitely just drop Luffy on 5, attach Dawn onto him with leader, swing 7, and just keep the pressure on. So that's the thing, is that he's so usable. I wouldn't really drop him to less than 3. I wouldn't play more than 3 either because he can clog you. And with all your rush attackers not having counter, it's just kind of hard to deal with. So now talking about Shanks, I'm only playing 2 of Shanks just because when I was playing 4 of it, it was a little bit of a brick, and I think 2 is perfect. When you reveal it off of your searches, it sucks seeing your only 1 go to the bottom of the deck. But I do want to drop Shanks every single game. So if you wanted to play a 3rd Shanks, you absolutely can. But I think that Shanks is actually a really powerful card, and I think that he's a really cool card. He's another way to deal with 8-drop Kid. He's another way to push just stupid aggression on your opponent. If your opponent's down to no life and a 2k and just a 2k blocker, which by the way, we actually have a game with that exact situation. If you want to check it out, I'll have it linked down below. But it'll come up. You can top deck this card and just win because he can't be blocked by 2 characters with a power of 2k or less. So he's another powerful blocker. And sometimes when you're up on your opponent, if you're on 3 life and you're not like in a super crazy rush to finish your opponent off, if you're on 3 life, you can tap 9, drop this guy, and then keep your 5 and your 3 and your 2 cost rushes in hand, as opposed to being on 9 Dawn, tapping 5, playing Luffy, using effect, and then tapping 2, using Nami and Luffy, attach and use effect. Now you're conserving 2 rush attacks to present to your opponent while also putting a really big problem on your opponent's radar that they have to deal with. So utilizing Shanks is really interesting, and it's a really good card, and I just implore all Red Luffy players to try it out at kind of larger numbers. I think 2 is a really good number for me because I'm playing so many weird techs in this deck, but also at the same time, I think that playing him at 3 would be kind of closer to a perfect number, but this is the for me number, I would say. Looking at our next card, we're for sure just going to talk one of why I think Thousand Sunny is actually a fantastic card in Luffy in general. The turn that you play this card, you lose no advantage because you tap 2 Dawn, you use leader ability to attach 1 of the rested Dawn, and then you use this ability to give something plus 1k, so it gets plus 2k just like if you attach 2 Dawn underneath it. So that's really good. And it's really nice. I play it at 1 of because you can't brick on it at 1 of. One of the things that I've seen a lot of people talk about when they were talking about the card is that it's a brick. It's not a brick if there's only 1 of it because you can always field it, and it's really useful. And actually, I love this card. It just has made a lot of impact. There are times where if you're holding a 9-drop Shanks in hand and your opponent, maybe they don't even have any blockers, but you have like, you really want to board it, and your opponent's on maybe 1 life or 0 life left, You can present a 7k attack with your leader just by attaching one of your 10 Dawn to leader, tapping 1000 Sunny, giving it another 1000, and now it's swinging for 7. That's something that's just really useful, and like those kind of situations come up a lot more than I can just name in this video. There's all types of times where you just want to plus 1k. Even like one other thing that's really big is if your Sanji lives, you just ping it to 5 and then you can just swing with no Dawn investment. So that's really nice to just rip cards out of your opponent's hand. We'll push that right there. Oh, I guess we'll push it over here. All right, let's talk about the event cards because I play a lot. We'll actually just make a pause on In 2 Years and 1 Diablo Jambe. These are both Straw Hat Crew event cards that are searchable by Nami. The 1 Diablo Jambe is super simple to explain. It's just kind of how we push for game. If your opponent isn't really expecting it, just end game, tap 1, make your leader Luffy unblockable, activate leader Luffy effect, attach that same Dawn onto him, and then attach the other 9 and swing 15, and seeing if your opponent can counter out of it to just finish the game. Fantastic card. I wish I did have room for a second one, but I just truly do not. And it's, even if I did play the second one, it's kind of a test. It would be a testing slot to just see how often you can utilize 2. But sometimes I use it in the mid game to just kind of force through damage in the mid game to force my opponent from like maybe 3 life to 2 life. Force them to then defend against my next 2 or 3 attacks to prevent them from going down to 1 life, knowing that I can present a lot of pressure on the next turn too. So Diablo Jambe is actually a really cool card. I actually hated it in the release of OP01. Now I love it. So that's kind of funny. In 2 years at the Sabaody Archipelago. This card is just fantastic. It searches the same things that Nami searches. There's not a lot to say about it other than it's a really good starter and it's a really good searcher. The biggest thing to say about it and the biggest thing to note is that it searches your most important Nami, your most important, probably one of your most important cards in the deck. The card that really makes your plays going into the later game like almost twice as lethal. So really nice to see in the early game, really nice to see in the mid game. If you can fit a third one in there, I would definitely encourage you to fit that third one in there because finding those Namis is actually super, super sick. It makes the deck just feel so much stronger. So highly recommend it if you are seeing things that you're not liking. And then the last few things, we'll go over the 3 jet pistol real quick before we go into the defense of the deck. 3 jet pistol is good. I don't think I need 4. Sometimes I kind of wish I would just run 2. It's hard to say because this is one of the best cards in the deck, easily. I just don't know if it's needed at such a high number. It's searchable with the Searcher character card Nami, but it's not searchable within 2 years. It's super usable against things like purple because you'll pop their queens and things like that. Super usable against green as well. But I just need a space to fit other cards. So Jet Pistol is a fantastic card. You can use it as a point as well. If you're sitting on a couple character cards, tap 4, play Jet Pistol, attach 1 to a character card or a leader card, and then start attacking with things. So to try to push damage. And then the defense of the deck, we just have 3 cards. It's going to be 1 guard point, 2 radical beam. I really like this balance. If I was going to up anything, it would be upping 1 guard point, so I'd just be playing 2 and 2. I've been toggling between 4 and 3 defensive options in this deck, and this deck is an aggro deck, but I'm a mid-range control player, so it makes me feel better when I have these cards in hand, but there's a lot of times where you just don't have to use them because you're pushing against your opponent so hard. But having them makes you feel really safe. I really love guard point because it's just a really interesting interactive counter on your opponent's turn because they're not always expecting the plus 3k, so they'll swing 7 at you and you can still get out of it for 1 card in hand. I love the value in it and I just really like the card in general. But Radical Beam is just a little bit more useful. When I was testing it, I would just end up relying on the Radical Beams in the late game more than having the guard point be very, very effective. So that's kind of my reasoning for the defensive package here. I really don't think you need more than 3 cards, and that's kind of where the problem is, because if I had more room, I would just play more guard point and stuff like that, but I don't. So this is going to be the deck profile. I really love the deck. So circling back into kind of like where I feel the deck is and everything, if you've made it this far into the deck profile, first of all, drop a sub down below. I really appreciate it. We've been growing at a great rate, so thank you to everybody that's been interacting with the videos, that's just been interacting with me and everything. I appreciate it like you guys just don't even know. It's been so much fun growing on YouTube, and it's been just a really great hobby. So as I continue to add things, you guys can just expect better quality, just more content, more stuff coming. So if you guys are looking forward to seeing that type of stuff, sub down below if you're not already. Like and leave a comment because that just helps us get on the algorithm, which also helps us grow. But yeah, no, I appreciate all of that. I appreciate all the love. Now let's talk about where Red Luffy is in the general meta. This deck is tight. This deck is so cool. This deck is so powerful. And I think that the way that it presents damage onto your opponent, it can be so hard for your opponent to deal with sometimes. When you have Dawn open, I love just swinging 5 at my opponent. Sometimes all the cards in their hand are so powerful defensively that they're like, I don't want to dump a 2K counter on a 5. I don't want to dump a 4K counter on a 5. I will take the 5. And it's kind of like forcing damage through, and then you're dropping your 2-drop Sanji, attaching a Dawn onto it, swinging into leader. Then you're dropping your 5-drop Luffy, swinging into leader, and then you're taking the cards that they were planning on using out of their hand. So you're still pulling the cards out of their hand, and their defenses are whittling, and you were able to sneak chump a little bit of damage in there. That's why you guys see me talk so much about like utilizing Helmeppos, Namis, things like that, because when you have the 2K power battle cards on board, it's like, use them, swing at your opponent, save those rushes, because if you can push, if you can make a 2K, you know, like a 7K attacker, as opposed to just giving your opponent more cards to swing into by boarding more Rush Zoros and like your value cards, you're gonna end up like just out resourcing your opponent in a way that is just crazy. So talking about how it plays kind of into everything, red versus red, I actually really like this deck because there's kind of one turn where you kind of have a chance to kind of clear their board, and it forces them to have more rush attackers than you, because when you're boarding more cards than they're able to, and you have things like Ben Beckman that you can just kind of field in the mid to late game, attach things onto your leader, and just keep piling into them. You can play the game that most people play onto you, where you're not going to swing into your opponent's life and you're just going to swing onto your opponent's character cards, while also being able to force your opponent down to maybe like 3 or 2 in the early game, switch over to just clearing out their character cards as they continue to try to swing at you, because you just end up having just more defense. You have more cards that you can counter out. You have more defensive event cards and things like that. So you're gonna survive the war of attrition. At least that's how I've seen the red versus red matchup. Going into the red Luffy mirror match, that's just gonna be kind of a resource nightmare. You're gonna want to see your jet pistols because you're gonna want to clear cards, like guarantee. Attacking into cards is really, really nice and everything, but just clearing cards is even better. Your Otamas are going to be a different type of beast in that kind of matchup, because when you're playing Otama and then attacking with a Nami into Zoro, they have an entire different level of defensive thought process that they have to push through, because you can then just drop your Zoro and attack into their leader. Talking about the purple matchup now, it's just all on the board. Usually when you're playing against purple, they have a 12-card hand, you have a 1-card hand, and then you're ending the game with a 15K swing. You're just putting everything onto the board every turn. Swing, 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 swing. They're doing all that they can to answer your board, and you're doing all that you can to stop them from dropping a 10-drop Kaido, or putting them in a position where they're on 0 life. So if they drop the 10-drop Kaido, good luck defending this 15K swing. That's kind of your biggest focus, and you kind of are just going for that not war of attrition, just the war of getting that damage in first. You want to be the first person to execute the damage, and you don't want to stop. So even when they're playing queens and things like that, just if you can't clear the queen, make it block and then push. Just keep pushing. Swing a 5, that's totally fine, or just swing everything at 6 and make it so that they have to block with queen and use other cards in hand. But regardless of what they have to do, you just want to just continue that pressure. Using things like Bartolomeo is kind of difficult in the purple matchup because they'll just clear it. So you just want to hold those kinds of cards for counter in hand and board everything else as offense, in my opinion, in my experience. Against the green matchup now, that one can be kind of difficult because it's the same situation where you want to put them in a position where they don't have enough to defend against you, but that's really difficult to do if they drop like 7-drop Kid or 8-drop Kid on curve. When they do that, you're really looking to have on curve your 9-drop Shanks or your Ben Beckman. So just looking for your red hair pirates, right? Those are the cards that are going to really give you a lot of mileage on your board, and you can just keep swinging over and over and over and over again. Build a wide board, as wide of a board as you can, and sometimes hold your 6-drop Luffy for that situation where you can tap 5, attach the other 5 onto Luffy, activate leader effect, push them up to 12, and then push 12 into the Kid. So sometimes you have to do that, skip a turn of microaggression and just put it all in on the Kid and get past some of their defenses to kind of force them to have events and things like that in hand, or else they got to kiss that Kid goodbye. But I mean, at the end of the day, this is an aggressive deck, and one of the things that it was hard for me to learn coming as a mid-range player and as a control player is that you just got to keep being aggressive. You can't really take the time to care about what your opponent's doing onto you. You have to take the time to care about how you can cinch that last damage in and cinch enough damage into your opponent that they can't deal with you. So it's just, it can be a weird playstyle to kind of talk about and learn, kind of coming from the more control-y aspect, but I promise you, if you can kind of get it down, man, it feels so crazy just finishing your opponent in three turns or 4 turns and things like that before you guys even hit like 7 Dawn, because you've just swung out with everything and they haven't had, you know, the right answers. Last couple matchups, I think we haven't talked about the red-green law matchup. That one especially is swing out with everything. They're gonna have a ton of blockers and a ton of, actually it's gonna be a ton of blockers. That's gonna be the biggest thing, but take the blockers away. Just keep swinging, because they force them into situations where they have to block. Don't give them a lot of low numbers that they can counter out of. Try to swing 7s as much as possible, because 7s, a lot of time they'll look at their hand and just be like, no, I'm just gonna sack the blocker. Don't feel like swinging 7 into a blocker is a mistake or anything like that, because at the end of the day, you need to swing 7 because they'll get out of the tech anyway, and you don't want them to get out of the tech and keep the blocker. You're going to keep pushing until you can kind of push through that, and that's just the best way, I think, to go about that matchup. Just swing out early and try to end the game before they can go into their late game, or their mid game, really. And then lastly, the blue matchup in general is, it's really hard for blue because they can field a lot of cards and they can attack into your cards a lot, but they don't have a lot of crazy counter power. A lot of times what they'll do is end on a turn where they just sit on a bunch of Dawn up. And if your opponent's sitting on a lot of Dawn up and like not as many cards in hand, as opposed to swinging 7s like you do at green, or 7s at red-green law, now you want to swing 5s. Just keep swinging 5s and force them to use things like Level of Mellow on a 5 or a 6K and things like that, or take away all their counters so that on their next turn they also have to leave 6 Dawn up, 4 Dawn up, 2 Dawn up, to utilize the Level of Mellow that you stuck in their hand on the last turn, which means that they can't be as aggressive onto you, so you can defend easier, and they can't board as much dangerous cards, which means that you don't have to be as wary of the board. So with that's just kind of my opinion on the blue matchup. Play it kind of like that. Swing those 5s in the situations your opponent is obviously sitting on event cards, even if you feel like you could possibly close it out if you know what I mean, get lucky with the 9K and they don't have the 10 or whatever. But at the end of the day, they're going to be drawing a lot of cards during that turn, and it's going to be a lot harder for you to finish. So just devalue their defense and just kind of grind it out from that point like that. But that's kind of my opinion on red into the meta. I think that this deck is so cool, and the reason that it's picking up so much steam in the North American format is it just takes a lot of figuring out. I know that it takes a lot of playtesting and kind of like learning the playstyle of the deck, but I think that once you do learn it, it's really worth the time that you spend on it. So that's really what I have to say about red. So this is me, Jamonster, with Opus Gaming. I'm out, but if you guys have been enjoying this type of content, you guys have been seeing everything, you guys already know, drop the sub, come back for more. You guys are going to see a lot more from us, so take care.